Got to tell you, I'm back up north where it's a little bit cooler, and that's it. A little bit cooler, and that's why I'm back in the all blacked out outfit for tonight. It is unreasonably chilly, I would say, for the end of March up in the Northeast, coming off a week in Florida at the 12 Hours of Sebring. But I'm sure you're not a stranger to that either, Stu. How are you doing tonight?
I'm doing pretty well. It snowed here earlier, so
That's ridiculous.
yeah, I wasn't too pleased about that after some of the nice weather that we've had. But the nice weather is a sign that you know that summer is on its way, which generally means some more racing going on, maybe going to the track some. So there's positives on the horizon. We're almost there. We're almost there.
Yeah. Well, I think we have plenty of positives to talk about in this episode. Of course, we're going to be recapping the 12 Hours of Sebring, about a week and a half late. We are on a Wednesday show, by the way, for this one, which you probably have caught on to by now. But yeah, I guess we'll lead off with that. Of course, as I was there, I will say, just starting off here, complete thrill to be back at Sebring for the first time since 2022. I know I think it's it's not the one endurance race you have left because you haven't hit Indianapolis either, and I suppose you only have one
Correct.
year to do that, as we're going to talk about later. But that and Sebring being the two you haven't hit yet yourself, it's just a different energy for an IMSA race. I would say if you haven't made it out to the 12 Hours of Sebring, make an effort to do it at some point. It's one of those tracks that more than anything else, I think the history of it stands out to you going through the track. The main thing about Sebring to me is how little that track has changed over the years, both from the actual track layout, but then also from how little has been built up around the track. It is a very old school vibe going around there. You do have a handful of video screens here and there. Actually, not that many. I think there's only a couple around the entire track to keep you updated on everything. But for the most part, very old school vibe going on there at that track. And as a result, me being there for 12 hours and not catching up on the extended highlights yet, I'm about as wise as somebody who didn't even bother tuning into the race as to what happened during that race. Know the ins and outs of when there were full course yellows, of which there weren't too many this year. But apart from that, a lot of it's going to be a surprise to me, I'd say. It's okay. That's why I've got a co-host here who is more than informed on everything that was going on this year at Sebring, who will carry me to the finish line and try to fill in the gaps of everything I did know while I was there trackside.
I hope so. I hope so. Before we jump into Sebring too much though, it's interesting that you mentioned not too many screens at the track. I feel like that's kind of a theme that we see at a lot of the IMSA races. Like they do have the trucks that they roll from race to race that has like the big screen that they can position, where fans frequently are. But I kind of feel like those are definitely lacking a little bit around the track, and especially with the uptick in the number of fans that we're seeing come out to the races. I would love to see some more of those track side, some more of those TVs. Again, those big screens to keep the fans informed. That's the word I was looking for of what's going on around the track, because it makes a huge difference being able to sit there, like see the cars go by, sure, but also be able to glance up at a TV and actually keep up with more of what's going on in the race. So yeah, just a general comment there. But
Track owners, hope you're listening.
yeah, hopefully, or yeah, maybe there's somebody that wants to like fund a couple more of those trucks to go to the races. So we can only hope. Anyways, we could probably talk like for an entire episode on the state of the track experience or viewership and how to improve things. But we're here to talk about a lot of some Sebring stuff here, and I want to start off again with the GTD class. Going to talk about just kind of some overall takeaways from each one of the classes here. So GTD was it really is evolving as a class in a sense that, you know, we've seen some cars really dominate. I would say in the last, 4 or 5 years. Thinking back to Windward Racing last year, we saw FAF dominate. We've seen Paul Miller Racing dominate. And we saw much of our regular players that we've seen in the GTD class competing at the end of it here. You had the 57 Windward Racing Mercedes. You had the 12 Vassar Sullivan Lexus. They squared off for a great battle right at the end of this race. A little bit of, beating and banging, a pretty big bump and run. I think it's safe to say that Felipe Ellis pulled off on the number 12 Vassar Sullivan Lexus. Now, did you happen to see that highlight? I know it was right at the end of the race, so it would have been the dark. But did you see that highlight of that?
I didn't, to be honest with you.
All right. Well, I would encourage you to go and check it out, because one of the things that I found, we've seen this happen at Sebring, a number of times in recent years. I think it was BMW and Corvette in the GTLM class got together a few years ago, right at the end of the race. This was a pretty hard nudge. It's honestly, I think the 57 is very, very lucky that the 12, and I think it was Jack Hawksworth. Jack Hawksworth was behind the wheel at the end. Very fortunate that Hawksworth was able to hold on to that car, because they showed an in-car of it, and the steering wheel was like complete 180 to the opposite direction of where I wanted to go. So very fortunate that the 57 didn't end up picking up a penalty there, but a really good battle at the end, as we've seen in GTD time and time again. We saw it at Daytona with the Heart of Racing, as well as AWA, and we saw it here again at Sebring. It does seem like this GTD class is largely going to show us a lot of these great finishes time and time again. At the end of the race, though, it was the 57. Of course, no penalty that they picked up, anything like that. They came out on top. It was Russell Ward, Felipe Ellis, and Indy Donchi taking the win there. This is actually the second year in a row that Windward has won at Sebring, and they beat out the Vassar Sullivan Lexus with the Heart of Racing Aston Martin rounding out the podium there. In the GTD Pro class, again, I think, I talked about it there with GTD, but I think GTD Pro is going to be on another level to the battles that we've seen in GTD this season. We kind of saw some of the good hard racing that we witnessed at the Rolex kind of carry through. Nobody really crossed the line, which was good. And in this one, it was BMW that was up front for a lot of this race as well. BMW, Paul Miller Racing, even though they have that new M4, GT3 Evo that's brand new for this year, they do seem to have a really good hold on it early, and they were battling for most of the race here with Rexy. Rexy, the number, the Porsche, of course. They had a great battle throughout the entire race, and we saw lots of the other class competitors, dip in for bits and pieces of this race and battle it out as well. Ford didn't look as strong as they did at the Rolex, but they made a couple of appearances at the front here and there. Corvette looked fairly strong. Lexus, they looked like they had a good car, a car that, they could contend for the win with in GTD Pro. But unfortunately, they made some contact with the 48 BMW, and they picked up some front nose damage. They had to go behind the wall. I think they had a steering issue as a result of that. So an unfortunate race for them. But when it was all said and done in GTD Pro, it was Rexy, it was Lauren Heinrich, Klaus Bachler, and Alessio Piccarello that took home the win for Porsche. They beat out the Paul Miller Racing number 48 to the line, and the number 1 BMW rounded out the podium. So a really good result here for BMW, really strong in back-to-back races. And I guess I'll turn it over to you. Was there any observations that you had at the track in either of the GTD classes.
Yeah, so specifically about GTD Pro, I want to note that one of the standout highlights from the race to me, because it's one of the few that has stuck with me, was the battle that we saw, especially for the lead in that class. Talking between AO Racing and Corvette. Paul Miller Racing, of course, like you said, was looming in the background there as well. What I saw a lot of people say in a very good tone is that this is sort of starting to feel like GTLM again. And we've talked about this. I think we talked about this exact thing after Daytona this year, where the GTD Pro class, I think for the first couple seasons of it, you, me, and I'm sure a lot of other people were a little bit hesitant at first. It wasn't living up to the prime GTLM races that we saw between 2017, 2019 time period, when we had an all-out manufacturer factory war going on in that class. I think in 2024, we're 4 seasons into this formula now? It started in 2025. We're in 2025 now. I misspoke. At the point where we are now, 4 seasons in, I think this class has finally reached a point that we wanted to see from it all along. And it's been a little bit of a slow road to get there, admittedly. It's crept up in excitement as seasons have gone on. But I think right now we are at a point where GTD Pro is very close to what we were seeing with the peak of GTLM about, what would it be, 6 years now or so. And that's a very good thing. I think a lot of people trackside notice that there's definitely a huge influx of people around the track who were noting the Corvette versus BMW battle, sort of carrying on one of the standout images from Daytona, of course, with Tommy Milner and Paul Miller Racing. I think that carried a lot of weight into this race as well. The storylines are there. The cars are there in this class nowadays. And I think what we're seeing right now in GTD Pro is just phenomenal.
Yeah, I think one of the things that, you mentioned there, the cars are there. Like, the manufacturers have shown up, and like they're throwing, some factory support behind teams, and you're seeing, these full factory lineups that, like, some of the best GT drivers are just plain best drivers in the world going up against each other. So that's really, really cool to see. And, we were talking about it after Daytona. We're talking about it after Sebring. We're not going to see the GTD Pro class at Long Beach for the next round, but I'm sure we're going to be talking about it after Laguna Seca. It's also really cool to hear from the drivers that I feel like, especially in this class, there are a lot of kind of up and coming drivers, and this is like a step on the ladder, potentially maybe, on their way to Hypercar or the GTP class. And, they're running some of these tracks for the first time. And it is cool hearing from, especially the drivers in this class, about what the racing is like and the tracks and everything. So, GTD Pro just continues to deliver, and definitely going to be one to keep your eye on as the season goes on.
And one quick
class,
point here,
though, that you couldn't help but unfortunately keep your eyes on it for the entire race, it seemed like, was LMP2. And my notes from the race was just LMP2, man, oh man, was this class ever rough. Like, this race for LMP2, I feel like people have been wanting to draw comparisons from LMP3 and apply it to the LMP2 class ever since the LMP3s have been off the grid. But this might be the first race where I could genuinely get behind some of those comparisons. It was honestly a mess. There were, right from the drop of the green flag, the first 2 hours, we had 4 full course yellows. And I think at least 3 of them, maybe the 4th one, but at least 3 of them were caused by LMP2 incidents. The bronze drivers are usually in at the beginning of the race, but, Era Motorsport had a couple of incidents that brought out full course yellows. Later in the race, we would see just LMP2s just there was an incident where a car got spun. I think Spike got spun out in turn 1, and then in like turn 3 or turn 4, Gar Robinson got spun out by a fellow LMP2 competitor just seconds later. So a little bit unfortunate to see some of that in this class. But one of the redeeming qualities for this class was at the end of the race. Things did get cleaned up, generally speaking, as the race went on, although it did end in sort of one, I guess, the cherry on top incident for this class. But one of the storylines in this race was Tower Motorsports. We know what happened to them back at the Rolex. They got disqualified, the whole skid plate issue. And they were quick this entire race. I believe that they started at the back of the LMP2 class. Can't really recall, but for an endurance race, it doesn't really matter too much. But they were in the hunt for the lead here, sort of right into the final go of it. There was a full course yellow with about 45 minutes to go. I believe this one was also caused by LMP2s. Oh no, maybe there was an LMP2 incident right after it. It's hard to remember all of the incidents that we saw in this race, but Tower Motorsport looked like they were going to be in really good position. It seemed like they had kind of played the pit strategy right. They were able to get into the pits just before the full course yellow was thrown, because it was actually a tire carcass that brought out the final full course yellow. They were able to get into the pits for their final stop, but it ended up not cycling to the front. They ended up restarting in third, but they had a really good battle to the end of this one with the number 43 Inter-Europol entry. The dominant car in this class, which was actually leading for the on this final stint and dominated most of the race, was the 04 CrowdStrike car. But in the closing minutes of the race, they got into the back of the Rolex class winning number 13 AWA Corvette, spun them around. This was as clear cut of a penalty as you could get. Malthe Jakobsen behind the wheel of the 04 at the time. And, they got a penalty from the lead of the race with, a handful of minutes to go. So they had to serve that drive through. They ended up finishing, I believe it was 6th in the class. And then we never really saw Tower get quite close enough to Inter-Europol to really fight for the win. But it was an interesting final stint in LMP2. It was an interesting race for LMP2. Like I said, it was the 43 Inter-Europol entry. That's Tom Dillman, Bjoy Garg, and Jeremy Clark that took the win. They did still beat the number 8 Tower Motorsports, was able to finish second. So not the storybook rebound after the Rolex, but a very strong race by the number 8. I would say you gotta keep an eye on them for the full season championship. You got to think that they're in contention, a strong contender for that, even despite what happened with their season opening race. And then the number 11 TDS Racing entry, an entry that we always talk about having a lot of speed. They rounded out the podium here. Now, obviously, you being at the race, you maybe not necessarily knowing what all of these full course yellows are how they're being caused, what they're for, but did you get any sense from any of the fans there about the LMP2 class in particular, or was it so,
I can tell you it didn't stand out. I do know there were a handful of full course yellows, like you said, in the first couple hours of the race. And to me, I was a little bit nervous seeing that, because I was like, oh boy, we had 12, 13 full course yellows last year here. Yep. I don't really want a repeat of that. The middle part of the race, like we had a green flag run for a handful of hours.
Oh yeah.
I don't know the actual number of hours that we were green, but it was a surprising amount of time.
We had a 4 hours was the longest green flag run.
Yeah. And at Sebring with that many cars, very impressive, very sort of uncommon as well.
Well, I guess it's kind of like what we saw at Road Atlanta, right? We saw a really long full course yellow free run, which was not something that we're used to seeing at Petite. And yeah, kind of interesting that, you know, two of the last three, the Rolex is hard to, you know, classify in this, but, you know, go from Petite to Sebring and have some long flag rods is good to see.
Yeah. To photographers' delight everywhere, the sunset brought us a couple of full course yellows. If you ever want to go annoy photographers or videographers at an IMSA race, which don't do that, but if you wanted to, go find where the crowd of them is for sunset, and then if a full course yellow comes out, point and laugh at them, because that's generally what seems to happen every single time. Couple full course yellows we had there, and then the trademarked at this point IMSA endurance race final hour full course yellow that we had as well, to group the field up. But apart from that, it was, I would say, for Sebring standards, at least in the modern age, a relatively full course yellow free race. Of course, those first few hours were a little bit unclean, but I think for the majority of it, the standout to me was that middle stint.
Yeah, it was having that middle stint, seeing some of the strategy play out. It actually was a little bit unfortunate for some teams that got caught up in or had issues early. In some case, you know, cars that had issues that weren't really any fault of their own. You know, they, with there not being very many full course yellows, especially through the middle portion of the race, they were never able to really get back in it. So it did spread the field out a little bit in that middle portion of the race. But then, as you said, we did have sort of that, you know, late race full course yellow to bunch up the remainder of the field that was in contention and go at it for the win. Somewhere where we did see a much better race overall was in GTP. And I think there's a lot to kind of unpack from the GTP class in this race. We now have, you know, we're 36 hours into this IMSA season. But this was the first 12 hours that we were able to see of the Aston Martin Valkyrie in IMSA. So what was it? I mean, how does it sound? I assume that it sounds as good as you thought it would.
Yeah, I mean, I knew what I was going to be expecting going in. What I will say is, I wish I had my phone with me, because I would pull up the text messages I was sending to one of the guys I was trackside with. And when it first rolled out for that first practice session of the weekend, I texted him after the first couple laps it ran, and I said, is it just me, or is that car surprisingly quiet still? Because one of the talking points was, yeah, they removed the mufflers off the car. It's not as restricted as it was at Daytona when they were testing it back in the fall last year. First couple laps it was going around, I was like, it seems quieter than I expected. Not quiet by a huge amount, but it was getting drowned out by, like, say, the Cadillac still, for example. Okay. So I texted him that, and then a few minutes later, I was like, all right, never mind. Because those first few install laps they were doing, clearly I was over in turn 7, which is the hairpin at Sebring near the hotel, and they weren't really giving it full beans at that point. A few laps later, I was like, yeah, okay, this car is definitely up there in the decibel range. Yeah, a lot of people are fans of it. I had a guy who was walking around polling people at the track, saying which car sounds better, the Cadillac or the Valkyrie. And I saw him do this to at least a dozen people. So I guess there's a little competition going on at Sebring already. Yeah, I think it's a fan favorite. What I will say is, I think the standout thing for me at Sebring this year is how many people were at the race. We talk about this a lot with IMSA races in the past couple of years now.
What was the last Sebring race you were at?
I was there in 22.
Okay.
And so I can say 21, the first year I went, there was a fairly substantial amount of traffic getting into the race, maybe about a 30, 45 minute standstill in traffic trying to get into the track. 2022, I got lucky. There was really nothing when we showed up in race morning. This year, we were stopped 3.5 miles away from the track.
Oof.
So take that as you will. A little over 5 kilometers away from the circuit. We're completely in standstill traffic. I think the ETA from the time we left to the time we actually pulled into the track went up over an hour. So quite substantial this year. way more noticeable than it was even in 2021, and I thought that was bad. But the other side of that is the amount of people who are there. You go into Green Park at Sebring, which is one of the more notable areas. It's where the ceremonial couch burning takes place at the end of the race every year. And just packed with people the entire race. I talked to Marshall Pruitt, gave him a quick quip in the media center, just saying, man, Marshall, this thing's not really a hard sell anymore, is it? I mean, the secret is well and truly out with IMSA. And with everything we've seen, GTP cars showing up to race, the Valkyrie, of course, I think brought some people in, and then the continuation of the GTD Pro drama, GTD Pro drama that we saw from Daytona, I'm sure played a little small hand as well. There's not really a whole lot of negative press going around for IMSA recently.
No, there's definitely not. And it, on just piling on that like positive sort of, I guess, vibes from this race was, the Aston Martin finishing it. I don't think there were, there was a lot of people that were doubting, especially after, they had some issues at the WEC opener that they were going to be able to finish this one, but they did. They got through it, relatively issue free. I think they were a couple of laps down at the end of it, but they ran for all 12 hours, and like we kind of talked about this going into it. Like that's a win for that program, right? Being able to last in a race as difficult as 12 hours of Sebring.
100%. That was the main question going in, I think, for everyone. And yeah, I sidetracked myself from the original question that you asked me before. One of the points with Aston that I don't know if a whole lot of people saw, but was a talking point while I was at the track, is that Aston's actually doing, or they already did at this point, I believe, a 24-hour endurance test with that car at Sebring, which that track is violent enough after 12 hours of racing there. 24 hours of continuous testing is showing that you're at least very committed to sorting out the gremlins that you have with that car, especially before Le Mans this year.
Yep. I think Dove in the chat has given the perfect transition here of what I wanted to go to next. And that's kind of the complete opposite of, the good feelings that you got coming from the Aston coming out of this race. And, Lamborghini and the SC63, they had a not a good race at all. Better than the Rolex.
Not a high bar.
But they, after completing all 12 hours last year, it's 8.5 hours is what they got through this year. They had to retire the car with some floor damage. We're not, I think the expectations for the SC63, like maybe we got, I don't know, I think I maybe got a little excited after seeing some of the pace that they showed at the Rolex. But this is it almost has to be viewed as just a development year, I think, for the SC63 at this point. And just hopefully by the end of the season, can be consistently finishing races and just building on what they have there, because I really don't want this program to get to a point where and it may already be at that point, like, what's the future of this program?
Right. Very much a development year, like you said, but also, importantly, is that this is a year they have to show customers that car is a viable solution.
Yeah.
We had already heard at the start of the season that they're doing this 5-race Michelin Endurance Cup campaign this year with Riley backing, and it's only planned right now for the 2025 IMSA season. Everything beyond that would be trying to sell to customers. So given the performance they had at Daytona, or the lack thereof, and then following it up with a disappointing result at Sebring as well, can't think that stands well for them personally. Hopefully with some of the shorter endurance races now coming up, the next 2 endurance races we have both being 6 hours long, better things come their way. I do know the potential is there with that car. We had seen that at a couple of points last year in the hands of a different team, but I think the issue with Lamborghini right now is, let's be honest, they're changing variables too much. It's in the hands of a brand new team this year. That car has only run still in the IMSA WeatherTech Sports Car Championship less than 10 races total.
This was its, this was its 5th race, right?
Yeah, they only ran that partial campaign last year as well.
Race. Yeah.
So you have to look at the other side of that coin, which we're going to talk about in a minute here, which is working out a formula and taking something that's not too strong from the start and sort of evolving from that, which would be, in my eyes, the story of Porsche Penske Motorsport. I mean, look how they were able to turn that program around from year one to where they are now. But I think to do that, you can't change up the program as much as Lamborghini has been doing. That's a story for another day. You could talk about that for an hour if you wanted to. But I think in general, yeah, coming out of this race, I certainly was hoping for more things from them at Sebring.
Yeah. If you're trying to attract, customers for the program and completing, 9.5 hours of the 36 hours of Florida is, it's a rough start. It's a rough start, but they have a few months now. Watkins Glen isn't for, a little bit under 3 months from now. So they have some time. Riley's going to have more time with the car. Maybe they can work out, some of these issues that they're having and come back for a strong, final 3 endurance races of the season. That's what we can really hope for at this point. Where they're finishing on the lead lap. Maybe showing some pace, kind of like they showed at Indy last year, where they had that, they were able to lead in the rain. Have some positives to really start building on. Right. Another manufacturer that didn't have a great race in the GTP class at Sebring, though, was Cadillac. We talked about Cadillac, especially Wayne Taylor Racing. They showed some strong pace at the Rolex, but weren't ultimately able to come away with a good result. You did have the 31 Cadillac that did have, they were the
best of the rest
in this one. Yeah. Where did they end up finishing? They ended up finishing 4th. But I think this is kind of one that kind of just slipped away from Cadillac. They looked strong during the daytime hours, but as the nighttime kind of rolled in, that's when Porsche really came alive. And we'll talk about Porsche in a moment, but just kind of a disappointing day for Cadillac. Of course, the 10, which was driven by, I think it was Ricky Taylor at the time, got into the back very early in the race of the it was one of the Ferraris in GTD, I think. The red TRC one. Maybe it was like the 023, I think. Kind of a weird incident. I know that in the broadcast they were talking about, and Wayne was very upset because they were adamant that they didn't get into the back of the Ferrari, and the Ferrari kind of lost it on their own. I saw there was in-car footage that was released, but I don't know. To me, it didn't show anything that was super definitive one way or another. But regardless, they got a penalty. They could never recover from it. And then the number 40, it was a mistake. Brendan Hartley behind the wheel, a mistake, or maybe some sort of malfunction with the car. But they went into the barriers in sunset pretty hard. So, this is a frustrating start to the season for Wayne Taylor Racing, for Cadillac, based on how we've seen some of the other new teams, or I say new teams, teams that switched manufacturers, particularly Meyer Shank, and how they've performed in the opening couple of races. I think we kind of would have expected that out of Wayne Taylor Racing, but some work to be done in Cadillac as well. Overall, a disappointing. Not just Sebring race, but a disappointing first couple of races for them.
So that incident between Wayne Taylor Racing and the TRC, that was the one that was debated, right? Where people were saying after the fact that it didn't actually look like they had contact.
Yeah.
Despite the fact that they were penalized for it.
It looked like all of the camera angles from the broadcast cameras, and I assume IMSA's like other security camera type things that they have, everything that they had, it looked like it was pretty clear initially that the Cadillac got into the back of the Ferrari, because it was a weird place for the Ferrari to go off as well. But then Wayne came on the broadcast, or they interviewed Wayne on the broadcast later on, and he was not happy at all that and was insisting that there was no contact that was made between the two, and that the penalty, essentially ruined their race from no reason. But I don't know, like, there is a video of the onboard from Wayne Taylor Racing and the incident, but it's at the point where, like, you can't see where the front bumper of the Cadillac is in relation to the rear bumper of the Ferrari. Like, it's hard for us. I think the only person that's really going to know is the driver. Like, the driver would know, but I don't know.
Yeah, take the driver's word for it and see if they.
Yeah.
Do you think you deserve a penalty for that?
Yeah, exactly. So I don't know. It was difficult. It sucks, because I would hope that there's always going to be a camera angle that can kind of definitively show us what happened. But it really just seemed like that. I haven't seen one that has been definitive, and I've seen the onboard, and I'm not convinced. I'm not fully convinced. So it's one of those situations. I think regardless, I don't know if the 10 had the pace to win. I don't think the 10 had the pace to go up against the 31 even, or especially not the Porsches. But yeah, it's been a difficult couple of races for Wayne Taylor Racing. This penalty, the incident that was in this race, the incident at the Rolex, like, that is a big hole for a team that you would have expected to be a championship contender to now try and dig out of. So tough start to the season for them.
Yeah, I would echo that 100%. I mean, we've talked about that. I'll put my hands up, and if I'm wrong, say that I think that they're one of the teams I was looking at going into the season as they're going to be back as a championship contender again.
Yeah.
Their run with Acura wasn't too kind to them. They came close a couple of times, but ultimately I think Cadillac was going to suit them better. And like you said, just off to a rough start at the beginning of this season. Some of the things, not their fault. I think Daytona, honestly, we could have been talking about them being a contender for the win there. 40 got taken out in that mid-race crash. And then this race, of course, the cards just really didn't fall their way in any scenario. But yeah, we'll see if they're able to rebound. Got a lot of the season remaining here, but
yeah,
off to a rough start, like you had said.
Yeah, a rough start for them. But I mentioned Meyer Shank Racing, and Meyer Shank Racing, kind of on the flip side of that, they maybe haven't put it all together yet with both of their cars, but they've had two good runs in the first two races of the season. They ended up, the 93 ended up picking up a podium here. The 60 though is that car was coming on strong, looked strong throughout the race. But they got together with another car that looked pretty strong throughout the race, which was the 24. Well, maybe not as strong, but they looked solid throughout the race. I'll give them that. The 24 BMW, they got together in the pits, kind of a weird incident. The 60 picked up damage to the front left corner of the car. I think it broke some suspension for them. They ended up finishing 5 laps down. Maybe a steering component. And then there was the 24 that also picked up some pretty severe damage in that as well. They ended up finishing, 31 laps off the lead. So it was a rough ending for two cars that, we kind of thought were going to be fairly strong in this race, especially at the end of it. And the 24 in particular, kind of want to highlight because they were the pole sitter. They sat on pole, and they kind of shot themselves in the foot before the green flag, before they even crossed the start finish line. This was a blatant lane switch before the start finish line to come over and block the Acura that started alongside them, and like they could never really recover from that. They were kind of stuck towards the back of the GTP class for a good chunk of the first part of this race, and they just weren't able to come back through the field and and ultimately get that solid finish or get that track position maybe to avoid some of this pit exit traffic that ultimately cost them a good finish in it. I mentioned the 93 got a podium. BMW still ended up getting a top 5, so it wasn't a nothing day for BMW, but not a great day, especially after the pace that they showed at the Rolex. That being said, though, the first 2 races of 2025 for BMW in IMSA, they do look like they're turning into legitimate threats. They're not right at the back of the GTP class consistently like they were, it seems like, last year. And it's going to be interesting to see how they can sort of build on that pace to, especially to Long Beach, a track that they did show a little bit of pace at last year, and see if they can, maybe have, pick up a win or pick up, a really strong podium finish there and really get their season pushing in the right direction. But did you have any thoughts on either BMW or Acura here?
Just one quick about BMW. You talked about how they're starting to turn around, starting to become a team that you can look at as more consistently up at the front than they were the past couple of seasons, which is something that I've predicted, at least predicted going into Sebring. I had the 25 as my pick to win. Ultimately didn't go out that way, but yeah, I do see this as a season for them. They're probably going to pick up. I'd be surprised if they don't pick up a win this season, because we're seeing a different form from them. And I think that sort of continued on from some of the later races last year as well. Of course, they had that 1-2 at Indianapolis, makes it easy to say that. But with BMW, I think this was a race that, as you said, they might have had the ultimate pace to win, but ultimately just didn't have everything go their way. And when we've talked about that with all these other teams and manufacturers in GTP, and when everybody else has things not go their way, there's only one manufacturer left to rise to the top, and it's the one that always seems to find their way there. Yeah.
Yeah, there's that one that always seems to find their way there, and they are looking like that is going to be a hard force to stop. It's not impossible to stop Porsche, but man, Porsche, they have had a dream start to the season after a dream sort of 2024 season. Of course, they picked up a 1-2 finish in GTP with the number 7 of Felipe Nasr, Nick Tandy, and Lawrence Vanthorpe, picking up the win ahead of the sister number 6. It was a race that, while Cadillac was and the 31 in particular was the dominant car in sort of the middle stage of the race, the early to middle stage of the race, kind of when it really got strung out with that long green flag run. As soon as the sun started to set and the track cooled down, the air cooled down a bit, man, there's no way that you were going to stop Porsche. They looked so strong. And they finished off a race that they deserved to win. And honestly, like the way that the weekend kind of went for them, like I thought that they looked strong in practice. I wasn't sure why they only went and did the one lap in qualifying, or they didn't really get a true run in qualifying, but it seemed like this was going to be a closer race between some of the manufacturers that it ended up being. And man, Porsche just showed them how it's done once again. It was a great race for Porsche Penske Motorsports.
Yeah, and what did I say before the race in the last episode? I said this is going to be a race where there's going to be a late race yellow, and whoever has the most pace at that part of the race, and particularly track position as well, is going to come out on top. And as you said, Cadillac might have had that advantage with the 31 car in the daytime hours, but we had still 3 full course yellows to my knowledge, pretty much either at sunset or after the sun went down. And when you have those to bunch the field up, as long as you're still within a stone's throw of the lead, it then switches to who can maximize the performance to the end of the race. And of course, Porsche was able to do that better than anyone else.
Yeah. And with this being, arguably the most difficult, challenging race, at least on the IMSA calendar, if not any of the hypercar calendars, when it comes to reliability. This kind of puts to rest any thought that might have been there about, some of the suspension issues that came up a little bit at the Rolex. Like it was the 5 had a front suspension failure. It was, I think is what it was at Daytona. Porsche introduced some new components there to help with setup. I think this kind of puts any of that to rest. I guess the one thing that's kind of missing from their resume at this point is Le Mans, right? Like that's the one that they got to have circled going into the summertime.
100%. I mean, that's the one that everybody is looking at for them. Got pole position there last year. They had a first and third place finish at Daytona this year. They had a 1-2 at Sebring. Worst finish of third in the 36 Hours of Daytona, if you're keeping track there. I think the cards are in their favor. Of course, Le Mans is going to have more competition than anything they've experienced really ever before this year. But with what we've seen from them so far, I have no doubt in my mind that they'll at least be within a shout.
I think you're spot on. And, speaking of Le Mans, you have here in the notes, there's 3 drivers that are eligible to complete that, endurance racing Triple Crown this year, in the same year. And of course, they're the 3 drivers of the number 7 car in IMSA. There's going to be Nick Tandy and Felipe Nasr, and then Lawrence Vanthor as well. That's you got to think that those 2 cars, the 4 and the 6 at Le Mans, are going to be pretty strong candidates to win or be in the hunt.
It's funny you say that, because the 4 the past couple of years has been the car Porsche might have wanted to forget, or at least it was the 75 in 2023. And I will say there was some sort of banter going on in the media center after the race between those 2 driver pairs, or driver sets, because there were 3 drivers.
Yeah.
Just back and forth between Lawrence Vantor going at Tandy and Nasr, saying, "Yeah, I'm going to do the Triple Crown," and they were saying, "No, we're gonna make sure that doesn't happen," because they are going to be in different cars at Le Mans. I think you sort of touched on that a little bit, but Tandy and Nasr will be in the number 4 Porsche, and then Vanthor with his full-time ride in the WEC in number 6. Will be an interesting one to see for sure. I can't remember the last time we had an overall driver who was in contention for the endurance racing Triple Crown in the same season. I know it's happened a couple times in relatively recent history with drivers in like GTLM, but in that class right there, for the overall win, I think that would be something really special.
It would be something to see, and what a sort of year and a half that would top off for Porsche and Penske. And it's they figured it out. They have probably the best LMDH car right now, right? Across both of the championships. It's probably not much question there. I guess that's about it from Sebring race coverage, right? Was there any closing thoughts that you had on the race itself? I know there's some news pieces that we want to get to, but any finishing thoughts from Sebring?
I think I touched on everything I wanted to say earlier. I mean, it's the proof's in the pudding with how much, how many people are at the track this year. The product that they're putting on nowadays is just phenomenal. So I already sort of hit on that earlier, and I think that's where I'll leave it.
Perfect. Guess we can move on to the news then, right?
Absolutely.
Do you want to take this first news piece, or do you want me to?
Yeah, so I'll take this one off. We got, for the second year in a row, you've done a lot of talking this episode, so I'll take some away from you. For the second year in a row, we got the IMSA schedule for the WeatherTech Championship at the 12 Hours of Sebring. IMSA, of course, trying to get ahead of the curve and do their diligence at trying to prevent any schedule clashes for future seasons. Of course, that didn't really do anything for 2025, unfortunately. But nonetheless, getting their name out there first. They gave us that 2025 schedule. Not a whole lot of changes for 2026. We don't have any new tracks on the schedule, but what we do have is a notable change in one of the Michelin Endurance Cup rounds. That being that the Battle on the Bricks, the 6 hours of Indy, is getting transitioned over to a 6-hour race at Road America. And in return, Road America is swapping their 2-hour and 40-minute race back to Indianapolis. Now, you may remember we only had the debut of that 6-hour race at Indy last year in 2024. This will be the last season of it, and then it's going back to a sprint race, if you want to call it that. It's the first time Road America will have an endurance race on the IMSA calendar since 2012, which you may remember we had that fantastic photo finish between the Muscle Milk Honda and the Dyson Racing Mazda that I'm sure you've seen at least in some motorsports compilation video on YouTube. That was a 4-hour race back then. This is the first 6-hour race we're seeing there since 1956, believe it or not. I will say from some of the people I was talking to in the media center there, a lot of people are excited to have this race back as an endurance race. A lot of people have been calling for this. I think a lot of fans have been wanting this as well. But it does come at the expense of that 6-hour race in Indianapolis. And I do want to get some of your thoughts on that because the 6-hour race at Indy was, I think, something that Roger Penske really wanted. You know, he has that team in the top class of IMSA nowadays. To be quite honest with you, I think he would have preferred a 6-hour world championship race with the WEC at Indianapolis. But nonetheless was able to convince IMSA to show up there with a 6-hour race. That's getting bumped back after only a couple of seasons. We didn't have the most incredible fan turnout last year. It was, of course, raining during the race last year. I'm sure that didn't do it any favors. And I think it was also going up against Indiana University college football, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay.
Which over in the Midwest, they're big into their college football. So I'm sure that also wouldn't have helped. But some thoughts from you on that. I know it hasn't been a huge turnout race, at least last year when we had it, but any thoughts you have on Indy going back to a sprint race?
I mean, I think, you know, my overall reaction to it is I think it's just another example of IMSA listening to the fans and kind of giving the fans what they asked for. We have been going to Indy now for we've had 2 races there. We've had, of course, you said the short 2-hour 41, and then we had the 6-hour one. Last year's race was great. But I'm hesitant to say, you know, was it truly great because of the off and on rain that we had and, you know, really spicing up the fields quite a bit throughout it. We got to see a Lamborghini leading in the beginning, and then we got to see BMW break through and have a big win at the end. You know, did that leave us with a better, you know, sort of taste in our mouth than the racing action that we were able to actually see unfold on track? Maybe. Maybe this plays into, as you alluded to, you know, the fan turnout at Indy is, you know, it certainly didn't look like it was the same sort of fan turnout that we got at Road America last year, where Road America last year was pretty incredible to see that. So everything, when you throw it all together, like I'm happy that Road America is getting the 6-hour race. I think it's overdue that Road America is getting this. I think a lot of fans were disappointed when it was, you know, learned that Indy was going to be getting an endurance race again before Road America was. There's a lot of diehard fans. It's a classic IMSA track up in Road America. So I love seeing that we're going to be going to Road America for a 6-hour race next year. That's going to be one that'll be circled big on my calendar. Like that's going to be a really cool event. Now that being said, Indy still does have a 6-hour race this year, and I think that it's going to be It's going to be very interesting to see, I think, how the race unfolds this year. Maybe if we can get if we have better weather, sort of what racing product that we see unfold. And hopefully it is a nicer weekend, and we do get to see some of maybe the more local fans that, very local to the track, that may be on the fence about going, especially if the weather's not great. Get some more of the local fans coming out. So, like it sucks for Indy only spending one year on the endurance calendar, but they're still sticking around with a 2 hour and 40-minute race. All of the classes are still coming to town. Like, believe me, wait until a class gets taken away, and then you can then there's the real complaints that you can, or the moaning and groaning that you can have. But we're still going to go to Indy. It's an iconic track. Penske's still getting a race in their backyard. And then we're also satisfying, something that the fans have been asking for years, which is a proper endurance race returning to Road America.
Yeah, best of both worlds, I guess you could argue. I will say, oh, did you have another thought?
No, I'll have a thought afterwards. You go ahead.
Okay. I think one of the things for Indianapolis that made it not live up to the hype that it might have had when the 6-hour race was initially announced is that you may remember this was supposed to be a race that went into sunset.
True.
And TV deals, of course, that didn't end up working out. I will say, as somebody who sort of grew up on the 500-mile race that we had at Road America back in like 2007 going into the nighttime, the endurance races we used to have at Laguna Seca going into sunset, I know it's not ideal for TV windows on what would be potentially a Saturday evening, but more likely a Sunday evening, I'm assuming, going into that primetime window, especially with Road America being in the central time zone. But more often than not nowadays, we're seeing more and more IMSA races be streaming only. And I think if we're going to be at a point like that, I personally would love to see a race like that go into the sunset hours. You're talking, I know it is the middle of the summer. We're talking about a race that's in August here. August, right? Not July?
Yeah, beginning of August.
Okay. So you're talking about a race that's probably going to end around 8 p.m. Central Time, 9:30 Eastern. Is it perfect time window for TV? No. But if you're going to be streaming anyways, that's where I would like to see this race, honestly. I think that that's what you want to see out of an endurance race, that day to night transition. The photographers will love you for it as well.
Oh, yeah.
I'll give you a quick tip on that, IMSA. I'm sure they are already well aware. But to me, that's what I would love to see. I think that brings out just an extra level of spice to these endurance races. And I think it's one area that Indianapolis sort of fell short.
Yeah, and I mean, we were just talking about it a second ago, how much a race can change when the conditions like the day to night transition happens. We get to see it every year at the Rolex. We get to see it every year at Sebring. We get to see it every year at Petit Le Mans. But that can really change how the outcome of a race, and cars that come alive and really create some intriguing storylines for fans. For everybody to follow. So, I mean, sort of a dusk or early, just sunset finish at Road America would be awesome if they can pull that off. And unfortunately, it wasn't something that they could pull off at Indy, but maybe that's something that they can pull off at Road America. The question that I was going to ask, and it's something that I've been thinking about, is, with obviously this 5th Endurance Cup race is not anything like the other 4 in terms of the history that it holds, right? The Rolex, Sebring, Watkins Glen, and Petit, they're pretty iconic on their own. I was wondering if we could see IMSA maybe rotate this 6-hour race around a little bit more, if that's something that we could see them explore. Now, of course, they're going to be limited in the races that they're able to do this at. It's going to be dependent a lot on paddock space and things like that. But I really wonder if we could see them rotate this 5th one around. And I wonder if that's something that they would explore, because I don't know if very many people were expecting this news to come out in the first place, but I
Yeah,
don't know.
yeah, it was a bit of a surprise story. Um, I'm interested in the idea for sure, but here's the only issue I see with it is if you have a 6 hour endurance race, you want all the classes to be there.
Mhm.
We think the Michelin Endurance Cup, you want those races to feature all four classes. How many races do we really have on the calendar right now, apart from Indianapolis and Road America, where we could do that? I mean, Canadian Tire Motorsport Park, your home track, is losing, or they've lost GTP by now. Of course, I'll
They,
advocate for them coming back,
I
but
mean, they couldn't fit like 50.
yeah,
I don't
yeah. So
even know
that's
if
the
they could
issue
touch
there.
50 cars. Yeah.
Right. So that's where that becomes an issue is you have that increase of cars in a Michelin Endurance Cup paddock. So really, how many tracks could they rotate it? Now, could they flip between Indianapolis and Road America year on end? Yeah, I'm sure they could put together something like that. The only issue I see with that is it might become a little bit confusing for some fans.
Potentially. I mean,
I
is
a
that
lot
something
of
they're really concerned about, though? Sports car racing being confusing?
well, to an extent, when you have people going to the track, um,
Yeah, that's
you
fair.
know, a
Planning
lot.
like a yearly trip, right? Or
Right.
yeah,
A lot of fans of the IMSA championship, and this isn't to say that it's a negative, but they are more casual fans.
yeah,
You go to Sebring, there's a ton of people there on spring break who just want to go watch cars go around for 12 hours and have a good time.
it's fair.
Um, I think with these Michelin Endurance Cup races in particular, you're usually getting some more of those people. If you rotate that race every year, even if it's just alternating between two tracks, I think that could get a little bit confusing. I don't know if that would hurt the overall attendance over time, but I would imagine that's something that IMSA is probably at least considering.
Yeah, yeah. You're right. I mean, there are only a few tracks that can actually handle a race like this, but it it would be an interesting concept to, since the series seems very hesitant to add more races on,
Yeah.
um which I think a lot of the fans, would love to see another race or two tacked on, but of course this IMSA is trying to be very conscious of the costs that are associated with doing that. And I guess this isn't really related to it is related to the IMSA schedule, but nothing that has been, confirmed for 2025 or anything. Definitely heard some interesting, or read some interesting articles, saw blurbs of it out there about, John Doonan talking about the Pacific Northwest,
Yeah. Yeah.
and could an IMSA race work in the Pacific Northwest? There's a lot of constraints that they have, because they only want to do like one West Coast swing per year. But that would be interesting too. Maybe not for like a 6 hour race or something, but maybe you could piggyback. Again, I feel like we talk about kind of an IMSA NASCAR, and like we're seeing more crossover between the two. Like we've seen some support series go there. There is a NASCAR race up in Portland, but they don't bring the top series there. So maybe that's, like, could be some options that could be intriguing like that. But it's all about the IMSA schedule and making sure that they're not making teams go to the West Coast for more than one West Coast swing in a year. But yeah, that's a lot. That's There's not really much behind that right now, other than they're talking about it. So I don't know, the IMSA schedule, after a couple of years of it, just being locked in as the same thing, we might be in for a little bit more change, I guess, or some tweaks in the coming years, potentially. Well, we know one for sure next year, but
Yeah. If I'm not mistaken, there's a potential of I think it's a Tilka designed track up in the Seattle metro area. Not anywhere actually in the city, but maybe about an hour outside. So maybe that's something IMSA looks into in the future. I don't know. It could be exciting. I
Yeah.
think with them, to the main draw to an area like Seattle are the sponsors that they have. I
Yeah.
mean, sponsors are a huge part of
Yep.
any championship, but I think IMSA in particular, where you have a lot of these higher end executives, not just as sponsors, but also racing in the championship. And I don't, of course, have a list off the top of my head of the Seattle-based companies that are represented in IMSA, but I would have to imagine that's something that would, that would persuade them to try to get a race in that region.
Well, and it's not even necessarily the companies that are currently in the sport.
Yeah.
It's trying to attract new ones to the sport as well, and
Yep.
being able to go to their backyard and showcase their product. Showcase this IMSA sports car racing product to them, and seeing like, hey, this is what it's all about. Like, this is the technology that are in these cars, and yeah, it it would certainly be for a heck of a lot more than IMSA just putting a pin on their schedule map for the Pacific Northwest. There would definitely be a lot of other motivating factors to go to the Pacific Northwest.
Yeah. I guess if I'll get one closing thought on this schedule announcement, I'll pitch you one idea, and that is I will offer you, out of the graciousness of my heart, a 6-hour race at Detroit. Take it or leave it.
Is this in addition? Is this an additional race?
No, it's just 6 hours of what we saw last year on the streets of Detroit.
I don't think I could take 30 minutes of what we saw last year at Detroit. I think I'm going to go to Detroit this year. So
There you go.
So yeah, ask me after that what I think 6 hours would be like.
Yeah. All right, I'll move things on to the next story here. A couple of quick news stories before we get on to the main story. Pascal Wehrlein, of course, doing favors for Porsche recently, reigning Formula E champion over there for the factory Porsche team. And they've decided to reward him for that effort with a drive for Porsche Penske Motorsport at the 24 Hours of Le Mans this year, which is no small gesture from Porsche, I'll say. There's a lot of competition over that final seat that they have in that number 4 car at Le Mans. We've heard rumors in the past that maybe that's something Sebastian Vettel could slot into. He, of course, tested the 963 about a year ago. But no, it will be Pascal Wehrlein this year, stepping up to race in that car alongside Felipe Nasr and Nick Tandy. We already talked earlier on. We talked about 20 minutes ago about how strong we expect Porsche should be at Le Mans this year, given everything we've seen from them at the start of the season. That now does mean that the entire hypercar lineup of drivers is filled for the 2025 24 Hours of Le Mans. Try saying that 10 times quickly. But it's not the first time that we've seen Pascal Wehrlein in a Porsche 963. Of course, we saw him as one of the additional drivers at this year's Rolex 24 at Daytona, racing in the JDC Motorsports 963, where he enjoyed plenty of time on track there. A couple quick thoughts from you on this driver signing.
It's I feel like it's been talked about for a while, and it's finally coming to fruition. So, Pascal did well at the Rolex, looked strong. I think it's a perfectly justified choice, and going to be interesting to see how he gets on with a couple of drivers that we just talked about a moment ago that have been pretty successful this year. So, a pretty strong lineup, I think you have to say, for the 24 Hours of Le Mans.
Yeah, 100%. We also got news, I think today, of a new GTD team who's not new to IMSA by any means, who will be racing the next race at Long Beach in the GTD class. That being AO Racing, making their return to the GTD class. They've stayed out of the news in the past few weeks, haven't they?
Oh, yeah.
With car 177 there. It'll be the first time they've raced in GTD since 2023. Stepped up to the GTD Pro class at the start of last season. Driver lineup for that will be Johnny Edgar and Lawrence Vantor, who has already had, let's just say, a good start to the season in IMSA in that 963. As the third driver over there. But now we're going to be seeing him over in the the GTD class. I think it's going to be a very strong driver pairing. AO Racing, of course, coming off a win at the 12 Hours of Sebring. You got to look at that lineup and that team and that class and say they're probably going to be one of the favorites for Long Beach.
Yeah, I think got Lawrence Venthor in your car. Like, yeah, you're gonna be pretty good. Johnny Edgar definitely no slouch either. So gonna be a strong entry in GTD. But again, we just talked about it. Like there are some strong entries in this class. Like the Vassar Sullivan and their Lexus. You got to think that Vassar Sullivan is probably going to do this as well. And they did it for both of the races last year where they brought the extra car. So probably a strong chance that they're going to do that again. Maybe see another, kind of one-off entry or two that jump over. Long Beach is kind of very quietly a pretty iconic race in the IMSA world. Like there's a lot of drivers in the paddock that, you ask a race maybe that they haven't won yet that they really want to win in IMSA, and it's the Grand Prix of Long Beach. It has a long history behind it.
Yep.
So wouldn't be surprising if we see a number of a few other sort of one-off entries like this. But yeah, AO Racing, you got to think are going to be in the conversation at Long Beach.
Yeah, El Noob in the chat said, wait, is it the same Rexy or a new car for AO Racing? It is the same car, same chassis. And I think that actually brings up a good point here, which is the advantage of having two different GT classes, an AM and a Pro, a Pro and a Pro-Am class under the exact same rule set, which is, we've seen this with Lexus in the past. Now we're seeing it with AO Racing here at Long Beach. They're able to essentially take the car they're running in GTD Pro, scrape that red number board off it, put a green one on it, and throw it in the class and switch your driver lineup as well. And that's what we're seeing here. And I think that that's a great advantage to what we're seeing right now in IMSA, where if you want to have a full pro driver lineup, you can go race in GTD Pro. And if you still want to have representation at a race like Long Beach, I know for Lexus, that was a big thing for them for sponsorship reasons to be on the grid at Long Beach, which is why they brought that second car in previous seasons. Just really want to point out that it's great that the teams have the ability to do that.
Yeah. And yeah, it's on the flip side, we're probably also going to see it, at Detroit for much of the same reasons. You're talking about, some manufacturers that have pretty big tie-ins to Detroit, obviously. It makes it a little bit more challenging because GT Pro is, of course, an all-pro lineup. But this has been a really cool development that we've seen, like quite a few teams do in the last few years, of especially the GTD Pro teams also coming and running this race. So yeah, I would say, we're probably going to be talking about more cars that are doing this in the lead up to Long Beach. So it's worth keeping an eye on the news out there.
We'll try to update you with as many of those as we can.
Well, of course, naturally, there's going to be more that are announced tomorrow, right?
Well, yeah, that's the way it would go on a Thursday morning. Moving on to our main story for this episode, an hour and 15 minutes in, nears makes no difference. Have a story that was posted to both the Race and Endurance Info. I'm going to link both of those in the description on YouTube and on podcasting platforms. I encourage you to read those yourself. I'm not going to read it word for word. I'm going to paraphrase, and I will say the Endurance Info article is membership only, and it's also in French. So if you're a member, pull up Translate on it, unless you're fluent in French, of which I'm not, despite trying. Thibaut Villemont, I probably butchered that with my 2 years of French lessons. Gave us some details on, I think, a surprising news story for me at least, which is the continuation of Peugeot's hypercar program in the World Endurance Championship and what that may look like. The reason I say that is simple. Okay, we've seen the 9X8 on the grid since the 2022 6 Hours of Monza. Of the 19 races that it's run, we've of course seen 2 iterations of that car. Now we had the famed wingless version, and then the winged version that started at Imola in 2024. Of those 19 races that it's run, they've only been on the podium twice. Once was a 3rd place finish at Monza in 2023. And then last year at Bahrain, they were able to manage a podium late in the race, mostly due to strategy and also because of a penalty that came for the 51 Ferrari that finished 2nd. I think the most damning stat for them, honestly, is the fact that since the new car rolled out at Imola last year, they've only qualified in the top 10 once. And that was the most recent race out at Qatar. They qualified 10th there. But also since rolling out that Evo car last year, they've only finished in the top 7 twice. We've been no stranger to talking about that program on this show, at least I haven't, and talking about how they just haven't been able to seem to figure out how to get it rolling. There were definitely moments with it where we saw the potential, it looked promising, and then they rolled out a new car last year, and all of a sudden everything was reset. And I don't think that they've been able to find that momentum that we might have expected from them when they rolled out that new car. So that's the reason why you would need a new car, I think, for them. Also, a quote that came from the article says that there's a strong will to continue with that hypercar program, and that will is coming from Stellantis, who is the parent company of Peugeot. To me, I think the objective here is pretty simple. You go run a car in the hypercar class, you're of course competing to win, but you're also competing to draw eyes to your brand. And really, what better way to do that than to go race a car in a world championship at the 24 Hours of Le Mans, where you really have a lot of freedom over the design of the car and sort of how that design reflects on your brand identity. I've said that for a while. I'm a big fan of how much freedom the hypercar regulations give those manufacturers in terms of doing that. I think is a big selling point for the class in general. There is a hurdle with this, though, which is if they want to roll out a new car right now, do the regulations even allow them to do that? We've been in this rule set since the start of 2021. It's been extended now through the end of 2029. And quite frankly, I think most people are expecting it to be extended even further. I've heard 2033 was thrown out in this article. I don't know if that means through the 2033 season or up until 2033, but we have Genesis coming on. We have Ford joining. We're waiting that announcement from McLaren that we all think is coming. So we're going to have a handful of new manufacturers joining this class around 2027, 2028. And you're going to want to extend the rule set beyond 2029, if we're going to be honest. But as it stands right now, I have done the justice of scrolling to page 68 of 106 of the 2025 Le Mans Hypercar technical regulations on the FIA's website.
Our hero.
And if you go to Article 19, Section 1, it says a car manufacturer may homologate a maximum of 2 cars during the 9 championship seasons. There's a little cross out where it said 7 because originally these were supposed to be through December of 2027. Now it's December of 2029. And both homologations will be valid until December of 2029. As part of all of this, you also are allowed 5 Evolution sort of extensions, Evo, Joker upgrades, as we've called them more commonly, between January of 2021, when the rule set was announced, and December of 2027. And then an additional 2 extension Evo Jokers for each manufacturer between January of 28 and December of 29 because of that rule set extension. And only one of those evolutions is allowed to be styling related. Sorry to bore you with all those details, but what I will say I don't want to say the hard facts on this, because one of the issues with these Joker upgrades is they're not very transparent at all. We've heard many manufacturers now say they've taken Joker upgrades on a car, but we don't know how many of those 5 they've used. We don't know if manufacturers have needed to homologate a new car, i.e. Peugeot with a new car in 24. This article states that the author believes they've already used that second car homologation at the start of 2024, or I guess it would have been end of 23 technically, but for that car that debuted in 24. And they've also used all 5 of their Joker upgrades. Others are saying they've only used all 5 Jokers but haven't used that second homologation. I think personally that's more likely. But for the sake of argument, I'm going to say, let's say they did use that second homologation and they've also used all 5 Jokers. That car would be frozen in its current state with the current regulations until the end of 2029. They can't touch it. They can change the livery on it. They can change the drivers, but that's about it. They cannot change the rest of they can't put any upgrades on that car until the end of 2029, if that were the case. But this is a big one. As I said, we expect those rule sets, or that regulation rule set, to be extended. I think that's the writing's on the wall for it. I wouldn't be surprised if we hear something at Le Mans this year about that. If it's extended another 3, maybe 4 seasons, then you're talking about they're going to have to allow manufacturers the ability to put additional upgrades on the car. They're going to maybe allow a 3rd iteration, at bare minimum additional Joker upgrades, because at that point you'll be on 2021 to 2033 season. You're talking 12, 13 seasons with that rule set.
Yeah, it's a long time.
It's not feasible to have 2 homologated cars in that time period, really, despite the fact that it is a BOP formula. And I guess that brings me on to the last question here that I think some people may have, which is, okay, the car is uncompetitive right now. It has been since the middle of 2022. Isn't BOP supposed to correct this? Isn't it supposed to prevent the case that we're seeing where manufacturers need to spend egregious amounts of money to pour upgrades into their car and develop new cars entirely because they simply aren't competitive enough? And to that, I will say, to a point, yes. But if you go back 38 episodes or so, the first episode you and I did on this show, where we were talking about the ethos of balance of performance in the WEC is balancing the maximum theoretical potential of each car.
Bingo.
I had arguments against that, to be honest. I don't personally think you can realistically determine that maximum theoretical potential off simulation data alone. But that is what they're trying to accomplish here. And essentially what they're saying in that is, look, we've given you a car that has the potential to be just as competitive as the Porsches, the Toyotas, the Ferraris, the cars that are front runners at every other race. And you simply aren't finding the way to make that happen. If you look at the BOP tables, Peugeot commonly has one of the lightest cars on the grid, if not the lightest car in the hypercar class, and oftentimes one of, if not the most powerful cars in the class as well. And yet they're still finding their way behind Ferrari and Toyota and Porsche and these guys that we look at as front runners. I think this is a very interesting story because I think a lot of additional manufacturer stories weigh on the decision here. If they get, now let's go back to the theoretical here and say that they've used both of those homologations and they've also used all 5 Joker upgrades. If they want to roll out a new car post 2026 season, which is really what we're looking into here, they would need to get a waiver from the ACO and the FIA, which, let's be honest, is not entirely uncommon. This has happened multiple times, not necessarily for this class, but for other classes in the past. We've seen all other manufacturers sign on and say, yeah, they can race in this class, despite the fact that they're not hitting this critical point that we have in the regulations. So there could be an exception put in place for them to create an additional car if they really were capped out right now. But I will say, I don't like the direction that's going, because if we jump back to my point here, this being a BOP class, the whole point is to control costs.
Yeah.
And you can do that to an extent, which I think they successfully have. We see how many manufacturers have committed to this formula at this point. But when you're at a point where manufacturers are tapped out in the amount of upgrades they're allowed to put on their car, and then you start looking into granting them additional upgrades within that same window, that's a little bit of a slippery slope, because then you're talking about rising costs. Of course, the manufacturers would have to, commit to those additional costs on their own accord, but it starts to turn into a bit of a development war again. I just think that's a slope you want to avoid. You don't want to go down that path with the way that this rule set is designed right now. I've said a lot there. I want to give you the floor to give some of your thoughts on this as well. Of course, the main thing I really look at here is I think the rule set's going to be extended. I think we've been expecting that for a while now. And I'm just
Heavily
curious.
rumored.
Yeah, heavily rumored. And I'm curious or what impact that's really going to have on the regulations that we have here.
I mean, yeah, you would have to think that if it does get extended, then at the very least, there's going to be, a fair number of additional jokers that are handed out. If you're talking about, a manufacturer like Toyota, who's already been talking about introducing a new car, if these regulations are extended until like 2033 or around there, then you got to think that it would be pretty realistic to think that you could have a third iteration of the car added in there. I think the BOP point is pretty interesting in all of this discussion, because you're right. Like, the BOP is supposed to keep, the balance of the performance of the fields like pretty close together. You talked about the hypothetical performance of a car, but I think it kind of does highlight this conversation really had me thinking that there's lots of people that some fans would be very quick to jump and say like, oh, it was BOP that won so-and-so this race, or, BOP lost them this race. And like, yes, okay, sometimes, BOP can win you or lose you a race, but ultimately it's about, the team being able to, extract the maximum potential performance out of their car on a consistent basis, or extract closer to their peak performance level out of the car. And that's why we often see these top organizations like Penske that have been winning a lot. You saw even Toyota, they've done the past couple of seasons when the BOP hasn't always been in their favor, they're still finding ways to win. They're still extracting the maximum amount of pace that they can out of their cars. So, like, you could have a light turd that's really has a lot of power, but if that turd is a real turd in the corners,
where are you going with this, man?
Oh, I'm going with it. Then you're not going to have a good car. So there's so much that goes into it. It's a really interesting discussion and a really interesting, a very legitimate question that, BOP is in place to try and prevent some of this. But at the end of the day, BOP also can't reward a car that's bad and make it like that wouldn't be great either. So I don't know.
Well, I mean, let's be honest here. The way that BOP is handled between the WEC and IMSA is different.
You're right. Yeah.
I feel like with what IMSA has right now, we have major OEMs across the board. They aren't really allowing smaller boutique manufacturers on the grid. And so the expectation is a BMW is going to be competitive against a Cadillac. It's going to be competitive against a Porsche, against an Acura, against an Aston, I suppose against a Lamborghini. Um, with the World Endurance Championship, we saw those boutique manufacturers, the Van Walls, the Glickenhauses, the Asada Fraschini's of the world going up against some of these other manufacturers. And weren't necessarily there as top contenders by any means. I suppose that was a little bit different back in the earlier days of this class formula, back when Glickenhaus was properly competitive against Toyota back in 2022. But ever since the mantra has changed around how they want to handle BOP in that class, it hasn't really been the same since. I think to your point of, and I don't want to turn this into a BOP discussion. We've done that already. You can go check out episode 46 for that. But to your point on, it's not going to make, I don't want to say a bad team, because I think that does a disservice to teams that are good, but not necessarily as strong as full factory outfits. Why are we not seeing the customer 963s in IMSA winning races when Penske is dominating with the 963? It comes back all to that. You have the same car, but obviously the factory team with the factory drivers and a team as strong as Penske is going to be able to extract more out of that car than some of those customer teams. So you can look at it from that angle as well. I don't know. I think this brings forward a very interesting side story. And that's really something I'm going to keep my eye on, especially as we get closer to Le Mans this year. Again, I wouldn't be surprised if we get an additional regulation extension announced at Le Mans this year. Maybe not this year, maybe next. But this is something the manufacturers are going to be keeping an eye on for sure.
I mean, I was just going to say it would be a pretty nice thing to go hand in hand with a regulation extension and maybe the launch of a new car that we've been waiting a long time for.
Yeah, sure. I've questioned before, I think a lot of other people have as well, why Toyota is still running a car that's from 2021. And to be honest with you, I think this story made it clear, which is that, look, Toyota right now, they were rumored for some time to be rolling out a new car, GR020, if you will. But ultimately, I think the future of this formula is so uncertain right now, just in how far it's going to be extended and what the regulations are going to allow with that extension, that it was just more safe for them to sit on the sidelines for now and say, if we're only allowed 2 cars until the end of 2029, even if we're allowed only 2 cars until the end of 2032, we don't want to roll out a car right now, a brand new car, because then we're stuck with that car until at least the end of 2029, potentially even further than that. So I think after Le Mans this year, if it does get announced that there's an additional extension, you're going to start to hear more movement from some of these manufacturers, potentially rolling out a second version of their hypercar. But until then, I think a lot of these manufacturers are going to remain put. And that's just the way I see it right now.
Yeah, I think you're spot on.
El Noob in the chat said, let me understand, if they're trying to get more boutique brands in the WEC via BOP, why do they do the 2-car rule? To be honest with you, I don't think they're trying to get boutique manufacturers on the grid right now. I think the 2-car rule, and I've been vocal about that since it was rumored, was kind of put in place to push them away a little bit, and it has done that. Ultimately, they're fighting against maximum capacity grids right now. They don't really have room for brands on the grid that aren't carrying as much weight as these top OEMs. So I, to be honest with you, think the 2-car rule is sort of what put the nail in the coffin for those brands. You're welcome to argue me if you want on that. But I think the BOP is really just more in terms of attracting the OEMs, because you have a rule set right now that, number one, gives you the freedom to go crazy with the car design. As I mentioned, I think that's important to them. It's cost effective. And the idea is that given enough resources, you are supposed to be just as competitive as anybody else, and sort of given a relatively equal playing field where you don't have to spiral costs into a development war. I think really that's what they were going for, and that's why we have as many manufacturers as we do now.
Would be interesting to it would be, and we've talked about this before. It would be nice to see those boutique manufacturers in the sport in some form, even if that's in, kind of, what we see with ALMS and ELMS right now, where, the winners of those championships get an invite to Le Mans. And there's been plenty of talk about that in the past, so don't want to open up that can of worms again. But that would be an interesting way to still keep some of those boutique manufacturers around, but just not in the full WEC.
Yeah, and I talked with people at Sebring. I'm gonna pitch this on a separate episode. I'm not gonna get too far into it right now. It's a separate story, but the short form of it is, I think you want to start looking into those regional ACO managed championships, the European Le Mans Series and the Asian Le Mans Series, and start seeing if there is an interest to at least allow privateers there. I wouldn't open it up for factory teams.
Yeah.
But there's one special thing I would put as a staple on that. And I'll discuss that in an episode where we have a slow news week, but I'll save that for a rainy day.
I like it. Tune in, folks.
It's like getting people back into the show. You hit them with the hook, and now we got to reel them in.
Now we have a cliffhanger now.
Yeah. The rare Rain Race podcast cliffhanger. Just going back into the chat and answering some of the questions we had from earlier. And I think we'll be able to call it a show after that.
I think so.
Do you see the same future for the Valkyrie and BMW in the WEC? So I assume you mean just as in
probably the performance curve, how
right,
BMW.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
That's what I would guess.
Well, I think BMW is definitely a strong manufacturer this year in both IMSA and the WEC. So I think for them, this is going to be a season where they already want to be looking at race wins. For the Valkyrie, I wouldn't expect that this year. I think this is still going to be a season for them, at least in the WEC. I think IMSA, maybe where the BOP might be a little bit more lenient for them potentially, then maybe they get more success there. But I think for the Valkyrie and the WEC this year, you just want to keep the news stories coming out of that program positive. You don't want to have an embarrassing result at Le Mans with the two cars there. You just want to make it through each race relatively drama-free. They can't necessarily say Qatar went perfect by any means.
Yeah.
But I think this is really a development year for that car. And I don't think you can look at the first year for any program as representative. And the 963 is as good a reason for that as any. So I would say, in the future, there's no reason there's no reason both of them shouldn't be competitive.
Yeah, I think you said it. Like, this is year one of the program. We're not going to expect much in year one. Finish races, try and extract more of that pace learn more about the car as the season goes on. Start to see some performance improvements next year. Maybe you can break through with a big win at some point, or like a couple cars on the podium somewhere, even like that. Have really start to show that you're extracting the performance in year two, and then hopefully come year three, you're sort of a regular podium contender. And that's, I think, ideally where you would see the trajectory of that Valkyrie program go. It kind of looks like BMW, maybe sort of along that trajectory, kind of with an extra year there in IMSA, but at least in the WEC with this being their second year. So it's I think if you were to say, next year, if you were to say that the Valkyrie was getting the same sort of discussion around it that BMW is in the WEC right now, I think they'd be happy.
Um, Chris Longoria is saying when the next regulations come out, 2030, who do y'all think comes and who goes? Who stays? Possibly Audi and Nissan return. I think the last part of your comment there is unlikely, unfortunately. Just given where both of those brands are right now with their motorsports programs. The interesting part of that is, do we get new regulations in 2030? I'm leaning towards no right now, given everything we're hearing and with the manufacturers who are coming in the next few seasons. I think they're going to have really no choice but to extend the current rule set that we have. I do know, as sort of the other side of that, I think it was Thomas Laudenbach, managing director of Porsche's programs, has said that they're already looking into the next regulation set and what those regulations would entail. So it's a double-sided coin, really. Do you continue with the regulations that you have now and have additional years with the manufacturers who are committing and will be on the grid a few years from now, or do you risk losing some of the brands that we have on the grid right now? Someone for a lot more money than I have to make that decision. But to answer your question, I don't know. I don't really think there's a whole lot of additional manufacturers we're expecting to join. I know Mercedes was rumored for some time. Those rumors have sort of fizzled out at this point, I think. McLaren, of course, is, they're expected to be signing on. But in terms of who would be leaving, I think it's tough to say that as well, because to be honest with you, I was looking at Peugeot as probably the next team out the door, or the next manufacturer out the door. And now we're hearing that Stellantis wants to continue with that program. So I think that's difficult to judge. So I don't know if I want to give you a concrete answer on that, but I think you'd have to look at the manufacturers that are sort of struggling to find a rhythm with their program right now. And I think the one that really stands out there to me is Lamborghini. You can put pace aside. They're really struggling with how they want to structure that program, whether it's going to be factory backed or customer focused. And I think that that's something that would probably affect their decision to commit in the future.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you said that it's difficult to say who could be going in the coming seasons. But the one thing that I will add, and, listening to the This Week in Sports Cars with Marshall Pruitt and Graham Goodwin, it was a few weeks ago, I think, that Graham mentioned that, every story that they put out on the potential of a new manufacturer entering the sport is done with more than just, a napkin sort of rumor. It's they're legitimate considerations, and sometimes those considerations can go quiet for a little while, just waiting for the right time to come up, maybe wait for some other projects to be wrapped up so there's some additional budget for them, things like that. So I think that, any of the manufacturers that we've heard of the potential of, we've talked about McLaren, Ford has been, did Ford confirm? No.
Yes.
They did. Oh my,
Yeah.
there's so many of them to try and remember. It's difficult. Like Alfa Romeo was mentioned seriously, I think at some point last year or the year before that as well. You mentioned Mercedes. I think you got to be looking at any of the manufacturers where there have been very legitimate rumors and discussions around. You got to think that any of those are still very real possibilities. So, I mean, manufacturers see what's going on in the sport, and there's a reason why so many are joining. So, I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised. I wouldn't be surprised that to hear that any of those are actually joining the grid.
So you bring up Alfa Romeo. That's actually interesting because that was one of the points that was noted in this article. Of course, they're a sister company to Peugeot under the same Stellantis umbrella. So, to the author's understanding, the original intention was to sort of sunset that 9X8 program at the end of 2026 and introduce a new Alfa Romeo program in its place, and that would come with the with a new car. I know Alfa Romeo. I think they were rumored heavily, not necessarily heavily. I don't want to overstate it, but they were rumored, or at least rumblings were going around the paddock last year at Sebring that perhaps we see them enter either a rebadged 9X8 in IMSA or just an entirely new car. I know like even Ganassi's name was, I think, thrown around a little bit for that as a hypothetical last year. Those all seem to have died out by now. Stellantis seems to want to continue with the Peugeot brand as they're racing right now. So I don't know if I would expect Alpha personally, at least with the current rule set that we have. Beyond that, I'm not sure.
Maybe if the 9X8 isn't they can't do the third iteration of it, then then maybe you switch gears and put a new one in under Alpha.
Well, I guess you wouldn't have a choice, would you?
Yeah. All right, you don't want to give us our third iteration? Well, we're just going to build another car under a different name.
And there's one more question that said thoughts for the next Imola race, which I'm going to give you another Rain Race podcast cliffhanger here. I'm going to save all my thoughts for the Imola preview episode we have coming up. That race will be in about a little over 3 weeks time from now. So stay tuned for that episode. I'll give full thoughts there. And we'll discuss that race a lot more then. For tonight, I think we've got enough to call it a show. Closing up on 2 hours, which is a little over our typical window. But I'm going to give you the floor one last time. If there's any other closing remarks you want to make to wrap up the show here.
Yeah, Sebring, solid race. Just again a continuation of what I think we can expect to see in IMSA this year. We got some more racing coming up in April with Long Beach, Imola. So plenty to look forward to. The weather's getting warmer. That means more races to watch, and man, looking forward to it. The season's getting heated up now, that's for sure.
Yes, it is. We are well and truly in for another season of watching long endurance races and some sprint IMSA races thrown in the mix as well.
That's true.
And talking about as many of those here as we can. So hope you enjoyed this episode. We hope to see you in future episodes. If you want to see us ramble on those for a little bit longer than we would expect. And we got plenty more shows coming. Back at our usual Tuesday time slot, hopefully, for the next episode. Hope to see you all there. Take care.